I just became more interested in the relevance of underground and alternative comics. And I think that's maybe ruined my life, you know?
Welcome back to Direct Edition, a podcast about nothing and everything. I'm your host, Dave. Today I'm bringing you a great interview with a pal of mine, Larry Reid. Now, you may not know his name offhand, but if you live in Seattle, you know that he's the longtime manager of the Fantagraphics Bookstore in Georgetown. He also opened a gallery in the late 70s, early 80s called Roscoe Louie. He was the manager of the U-Men, the punk proto-grunge band. But as the manager and curator of the Fantagraphics Bookstore, he has been a staple in Georgetown. He has been a staple in the underground art and comic scene. He does everything from gallery shows there to musical events to Hot Off the Press Expo in July. He also is just a great person to talk comics with. He's been around since the days of the Evergreen College graduates, Matt Groening, Charles Burns, and Linda Barry. He also put on shows with Nirvana. I mean, he is a walking, talking historical roadmap of the alternative and underground lifestyle in Seattle. It's not just comics. It's not just music. It's art. It's books. It's kind of everything. This interview with him was great. He shot it in the back room at the Fantagraphics Bookstore, but I think there is more to be, there's more to talk about with Larry. I mean, I feel like we just scratched the surface. So if you are in Seattle, you must visit the Fantagraphics Bookstore. Check out one of the events. They've got a Chuck Sperry event that's up right now. So let's get to the interview with Larry Reid of Fantagraphics Books. Friends, welcome back to Direct Edition, a podcast about nothing and everything. And today, my guest, he has been called the mayor of Georgetown, Seattle. He is a fixture of the music, art, and comic scene since dating back to the late 70s when he opened up Roscoe Louie, the art gallery. He has worked in music, managing the U-Men. He is a curator of all things underground and alternative comics and art. He is the curator, manager, and the head honcho at the Fantagraphics Bookstore in Georgetown. I'm talking to my good pal, my friend, the esteemed Larry Reid. Larry, how are you?
I'm doing great. Got an early start this morning.
Yeah.
Film crew here doing a segment on Tom Price of the U-Men, a band I used to manage, and an artist who, musician who worked for Fantagraphics, and they were interviewing Mark Arm, frontman of Mudhoney, another former Fantagraphics employee, just sort of reminiscing about the early days of the Seattle punk scene and right up to the present time. So, rolled out of bed at ungodly hours, but here we are. I'm all warmed up.
Yeah, and you're in the famous half-price back room of the Fantagraphics store right now, aren't you?
I'm actually in our little storage room. I'm very
you're in the storage.
This is sort of overstocked, but we still have some of the crew members milling around, so I sequestered myself in the quiet room here.
The quiet room.
It's sort of.
Well, that is, I mean, most people that live in Seattle or in the Pacific Northwest know, how amazing the Fantagraphics Bookstore is, which is, you're the only guy there, right? Since 2006, since they opened.
Well, I was the first employee. I mean, now I have some part-time people helping out. And, at times it gets a little overwhelming. We do a lot of programming, and then there's all of the business aspect of it. But I've been operating this for almost 20 years in October. So
your anniversary's coming
right
up.
Right into 20 years. Which is kind of amazes me. So Fantagraphics Books, the publishing division, is celebrating 50 years in this year. And, when they approached me about working at the bookstore. I'll be honest with you. I was a little skeptical that a bookstore that focused almost exclusively on Fantagraphics titles at the
Yeah.
time would be viable in an industrial district like Georgetown, which
Right.
then had
Right.
been neglected. It was pretty abandoned and very remote. And I guess I was sort of wary that we would be able to maintain a viable business given all the obstacles, but it's gone remarkably well.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it has.
and this area that was once just sort of almost dystopian, post-industrial um, uh, area that, where all of the output had been moved offshore. It created an opportunity, I guess, for artists to move in,
Mm-hmm.
affordable spaces, and Fantagraphics was among the first to sort of start this transition to a sort of blue collar bohemian art community.
Right. Which
So
it
that's
fostered.
2006, and again, 19 years later, going strong.
And for the people that are watching or listening to this that don't know Seattle, Georgetown is south part of Seattle. It's become like a home for longtime bars and restaurants, saloons, obviously Fantagraphics Bookstore and Georgetown Records. It's definitely feels like, I mean, I moved there. I moved to the Northwest in 2014. It feels like what people talked about Seattle in the late 90s, early 2000s, late 80s. That's what Georgetown kind of still feels like.
It does. Somehow we've managed to avoid the gentrification that often follows artists moving in and to abandoned neighborhoods attracted by affordable work-live spaces. But, I mean, this area is home to Boeing, airplane
Mm-hmm.
manufacturing, and a number of sort of legacy industrial enterprises.
Yeah.
And as those sort of closed down or moved, it just created an opportunity for artists and creative enterprises, nightlife. It's great down here because nobody lives here, and we can
Yeah.
get away with murder, and
Don't tell
nobody
anybody.
bothers anybody, I mean, so I mean, Fantagraphics has been closely associated with the music scene, and we share space
Sure.
with the record store, so that sort of works well to sort of explore the intersection of comics and music, which has existed for a long time. When I first went to work at Fantagraphics in late 1991,
Mm-hmm.
I was, or maybe it was 92. Um, it was October, I think, of 92. The Seattle music scene, the grunge phenomenon was
Yeah.
just sort of hitting stride and becoming a kind of a global phenomenon. And
Oh yeah.
I was able to sort of organically connect Fantagraphics and the cartoonist community with the music scene, and it was something that existed. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
when Robert Crumb was here in 1991,
Oh wow.
he for the Misfit Lit comics art exhibition, he equated Seattle in 1991 to San Francisco in 1967, in the mid
Mm-hmm.
60s. I mean, he was commenting about how it had a very viable and a vibrant music scene, a sort of a fashion sensibility, a graphic
Mm-hmm.
sensibility, and cartoonists that sort of documented that. and promoted the scenes here. And I sort of felt that connection, but it was really nice to hear it from Robert Crumb, who was, sort of a founding father of the underground comics movement
Yeah.
in San Francisco. And so that sort of connection existed when I first came to Fantagraphics and at that point I was marketing and promotions director. So I was a big fan when they moved here in '89. I was director of the Center on Contemporary Art, a nonprofit, a fairly prestigious nonprofit arts organization. And as soon as they moved here, I started pestering them to do a big comic show. And I was sort of relentless. And in 1991, in the spring of 91, I hosted just this fabulous show of over 100 contemporary comics artists called Misfit Lit. And it was so successful that that Gary and Kim at Fantagraphics Books wanted to tour the show. And
Oh, wow.
They kind of lured me away to shepherd that process through. The show toured 7 cities in North America, and that helped sort of establish Seattle on a national and even global level as the center for what we then called alternative comics, kind of an update of underground comics.
Yeah, it just migrated north.
Yeah.
North.
Yeah. I mean, it was happening everywhere, but I think Fantagraphics was the first one to really promote it on a national level. I mean, there were a lot led up to that.
Sure. Well, I guess. Oh, sorry.
Well, just the transition from the underground movement, the hippie movement of the 60s and 70s into the alternative comics movement of the 80s and beyond.
Well, I think I mean, I know your re-entry into comics as an adult was Love and Rockets. And I think that's the bridge of those two gaps, because that takes, like you said, the music movement, the comics movement, puts it under the umbrella of punk rock, and that's Love and Rockets, and that's how it kind of goes.
Love and Rockets changed my life. Love and Rockets is the reason that I've been with Fantagraphics pretty much consistently since 1991. First as marketing and promotions director, and then here at Fantagraphics Bookstore. I remember the very first time I laid eyes on Love and Rockets. I was in New York at Forbidden Planet, a fairly famous comic book store, and I saw, those two women, Maggie and Hopi, staring at me, and I just immediately, there was something about that imagery that just drew me in, but before I even picked it up, it was like this. And visiting New York, that was probably about 1985. And what was remarkable about it is, I brought it back to the hotel and showed it to my wife, who doesn't really, not really a comics fan, and she liked it,
Right.
And it's like, and, pretty much from that moment, I was like, I want to be associated with this. I didn't know how. I knew very little, if anything, about Fantagraphics. That was my introduction, not just to Love and Rockets, but to Fantagraphics as a publisher. And, I was soon to meet Peter Bagge, who had just relocated to Seattle from the East Coast.
Sure.
I think I met him in 1987, shortly after he moved here. And Peter immediately had an impact on the local comic scene. He was at the time editing an anthology that was
It was
founded
Weirdo,
by
right?
Robert Crumb called Weirdo,
Yeah.
and um, his sort of charge, and I think what Crumb had in mind in recruiting him as the editor was to sort of update the contents and
Mm-hmm.
that had been largely Crumb's associates from the underground era to having Peter bring in the younger cartoonists from
Right.
what
Some new
what
blood.
came to be known as alternative comics movement. But when Peter moved here, Fantagraphics was considering moving from Southern California. It was
Mm-hmm.
just too expensive down there. And Fantagraphics moved here. And at about the time they moved here in 1989, again, just as the Seattle music scene and grunge counterculture was gaining traction on a national and ultimately international level. And the synergy there just was really created an atmosphere of immense possibility. And
Oh yeah.
shortly after my arrival at Fantagraphics, which I started working there the month that Nevermind was released, which
Oh,
by Nirvana, the album that sort of changed
I've
that
heard of that
trajectory of
band.
pop music. And I mean, we'd have parties and I mean, Nirvana, I mean, all of the local musicians would show up. A lot of the artists that were associated with Fantagraphics would be doing graphics, album covers, posters for
Mm-hmm.
these bands. And it was really sort of serendipitous
Yeah.
that all this happened. Fantagraphics didn't move here because of this music scene. And in fact, Gary Groth and to a lesser extent, Kim Thompson had little to no interest in or awareness of alternative music.
Just kind of crazy.
Yeah,
It's
it
kind of
just sort of
crazy.
happened. But I should add that when I opened my first gallery in Pioneer Square, Roscoe Louie Gallery, which was sort
Mm-hmm.
of had a sort of a punk rock neo Dada aesthetic. That opened just as three gifted cartoonists were emerging from the Evergreen State College. Linda
Yep.
Berry, Charles Burns, and Matt Groening. Um,
Some huge names
Graduated
that
a
are
year
cultural.
after I opened my gallery. I was familiar with those artists. I didn't know them real well. I briefly attended college with Charles Burns, so I sort of knew him. But I was in a situation to give those artists their first art shows out of college.
Mm-hmm.
And, from there, I showed artists like Art Spiegelman and Gary Panter, Matt Groening, and a number of others over the years. Uh, uh, Jake
Grain.
Kinney. And I want to clarify that it wasn't a comics gallery. I mean, I didn't
Sure.
make the distinction between comics and illustration and painting and fine art. It was sort of just this anything goes DIY punk rock ethos that were just sort of emerging in the art scene. And
Yeah.
I was able to maintain those relationships well to this day. And that was so Seattle as a home to cartoonists um, predated Fantagraphics by quite some time. I mean,
Sure.
Linda Berry was highly regarded throughout the Pacific Northwest before she became a national phenomenon. I would suggest, though, that Seattle, a lot of places lay claim to being the birthplace of alternative comics, but I maintain that much of the momentum started here. Linda, Matt, and Charles all were syndicating their comics. Matt had Life in Hell.
Life is Hell, yeah.
This predates The Simpsons. Linda had Girls and Boys and other weekly cartoons, and Charles Burns had Big Baby. So they were syndicating these in alternative newspapers. And, back in the late 70s, early 80s, there were dozens of them throughout the country.
Well, I feel like the Village Voice is probably one of those places that you could, the most people would be aware of a place that you would see some of their artwork. I mean,
Seattle sort of isn't given, I think, proper credit because there were, I think Linda and Matt and Charles Comics were sort of emblematic of really a different approach. It was going on in other parts of the country, but the fact that those artists were resourceful enough to syndicate their comics, and I know they were only getting $5 to $10 per submission, but when there were 25 weekly publications that were publishing those comics, I'm back then in Seattle in the late 70s and early 80s. You're making $500 to $1,000 a month. You were doing really well.
Yes.
And they would supplement that by selling artwork and a little bit of self-publishing. But I think Seattle those artists, when they were exposed their work through these alternative papers, sort of helped give rise to that movement and make people aware that this sort of work, this new approach to contemporary comics was going on throughout the country.
Yeah. And the fact that this stuff, I'm not one of those people that looks down at when somebody punches through the mainstream and, gets big. If they're still doing what they did, like if Groening didn't punch through the mainstream, The Simpsons wouldn't be the longest running cartoon in history. Yeah. If Charles Burns didn't punch through the mainstream, we may not have gotten Black Hole.
Correct.
It may not have reached the audience that it reached. I'm not as familiar with Linda Barry's work as more as her name, but in terms of music, I know a lot of old Seattle heads kind of scoff at the big four bands that broke through: Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, and Alice in Chains. But for me as a kid growing up in New York in the 90s, watching MTV and seeing Nirvana and seeing Pearl Jam, it's like, what is this world? What is this place you speak of, Seattle? Why have I never been there? That kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I remember visiting New York and people not really knowing anything about Seattle, in the 70s and early 80s, they thought it was Northern California or Alaska or something. It was a very provincial little fishing village. Or maybe they may have been aware we make airplanes here, But that changed dramatically with the music scene. And but a lot of those artists, like Charles Burns, were doing, graphics for Nirvana, for Iggy Pop, for I mean, their work was closely associated with, a lot of these musicians and MTV, and it reached a lot of people and really changed not just the cartoonist scene, but pop culture on a visceral level,
a big scale. Yeah.
And I think, of all of those bands, I think Nirvana really had a profound impact on everything, basically.
Oh yeah. Without a doubt.
and again, they were and remain sort of fans of alternative comics and adventurous art on a lot of different levels.
Mm-hmm.
But I think going back, it's important. It's often overlooked or dismissed the role that Seattle played in promoting and advancing, alternative comics
Yeah.
to the level that they've achieved now.
This is a very true statement. I mean, my entire back wall comes from, visits to the store, everything that I've got on here. I mean, Fantagraphics is published. I did want to ask you, because I don't know this part. How did you meet Gary and or Kim? Like, who did you come into contact with first, and how did you meet either one of them?
I met them through Peter Bagge at a party at Peter Bagge's. By the time they moved here in '89, I'd become familiar with them, and
Mm-hmm.
I'd worked, pretty closely with a number of their artists already that predated their move here. Jim Woodring and
Mm-hmm.
Peter specifically, but a number of other artists that Dennis Eichhorn, who did real stuff, a number of people that became closely associated with Fantagraphics. I had long-standing relationships with in a variety of creative endeavors. When they moved here in '89, Pete had a party and invited a lot of the local cartoonists and um, artists and musicians, and I pretty much, I think Gary and Kim might have been a little alarmed at my enthusiasm,
Yeah, yeah.
because I was a devoted fan.
Sure.
So I met them in '89, within weeks of them moving here, and I pestered them to do that Misfit Lit comics art show that really played a key role in sort of promoting that um, uh, new approach to comics.
Sure.
Went to Los Angeles and Minneapolis, and I can't remember the 7 cities, but it had a really profound impact everywhere it went. So that's how I established that relationship, and I was uh, really enthused about that show traveling, and eventually sort of worked my way into the marketing aspect by
Mm-hmm.
really, again, the association with the grunge phenomenon, which was
Sure.
huge. One of the issues that we had when I started working there is that the people that these comics appealed to had a hard time finding them. Uh,
Yeah.
Mainstream comic book stores, they weren't that receptive. I mean, they weren't hostile to Fantagraphics titles or these alternative comics. Maybe a bigger problem was the audience was uh, didn't really have any kind of relationship with comic book stores.
Yeah.
Comic book stores have become a little more sophisticated and diverse, but at the
They
time,
definitely have.
there's sort of the stereotype of the dingy comic book store, and there's some
Yes.
truth to that.
Oh, there definitely is.
Especially then. I mean, comic book stores again have evolved, but the comics had a hard time finding their audience. When I went to work marketing, one of the first things I did was try to get comics in record stores, for instance,
Yeah.
or these sort of hipster boutiques, the sort of punk rock um, uh,
My kind of place.
shops, and places uh, like Urban Outfitters, and trying to get the product to the audience, and
Mm-hmm.
that sort of met with limited success, but it helped create demand for the comics. And at a certain point, the comic book stores started, the more traditional comic book shops started stocking these books, and a few started shifting their focus sort of away from mainstream comics to
Right.
more to the alternative comics. And when I say alternative comics, that's sort of an alternative to superheroes.
Yeah.
Largely. Or just a different approach,
Different type of storytelling or different kind of art.
Yes.
Is also part of the alternative comics.
Yes.
If genre, if you want to call it that.
But I think a lot of those cartoonists, in fact, I know this now and having dealt with them, were obviously became familiar with comics through the superhero genre. I'm a child of the 50s, and my parents, my mom specifically, had bought into the Frederick Wertham, seduction of the innocent. I wasn't allowed to read comic books.
That's a bummer.
Not just the EC horror imprint.
Just any of it.
Comics, yeah, and that was sort of broadly accepted that comics led to social deviancy and juvenile delinquency and so that, of course, that just enhanced the appeal of these comics.
Of course, the forbidden fruit. It's the forbidden fruit.
So, I'd save up my milk money and go to the local, five and dime and take my comics out to the tree fort, our friends. We didn't save any of them because, in suburban Seattle, it was just forbidden. But what was interesting is when Mad Magazine came out as a magazine, I didn't get the same sort of resistance. That wasn't like, I think largely because it was just a magazine,
Yeah, and it was cartoony.
That had a profound impact on not just me, but a number of people in my generation. It was far more seditious than any superhero comic would ever have been. I think, I remember reading as just, an adolescent editorial that, don't trust adults. And we're adults, so don't trust us.
Don't trust us saying don't.
Oddly enough, that made perfect sense to me. But it wasn't a great leap from Mad Magazine to the underground comics that started emerging in the mid-'60s. And that was pretty much the end of it for me. I sort of evolved from the more mainstream superhero comics to the underground comics, and sort of slowly. I mean, there was a lot of overlap. I still, appreciated work by artists like Romita and Ditko, and I think Jack King Kirby was, exalted, well into my young adulthood when I was attended art school. But over a period of time, I just became more interested in the relevance of underground and alternative comics. And I think that's maybe ruined my life, here I am, decades later, still, I wouldn't change a thing.
I mean, to me, because I grew up as a late 80s, early 90s, as a kid, I only knew really superhero books. I didn't have any stores on, nobody carried that stuff on Long Island. It was because it was the beginning of the, bottoming out of the industry. But it's kind of like music. I mean, that's why I think, you talking about this two paths that are very similar, music and comics and the alternative underground. It's similar. Like you like what you like, but then as you branch off and you want more, you look for creators or musicians that are telling different stories with different sounds or different images, whatever it is. It's all storytelling, right? Music
Exactly.
and comics. And that's when you find the thing. You find the alternative route. I mean, I wouldn't call Sin City alternative comics, but Frank Miller's Sin City was the first thing I read that was like, wait, I can have like these great stories told with all of the bombast and stuff, but it's not superheroes. It's just
Right.
criminals. It's just people. It's just seedy. It's just seedy people. And
Right.
I feel like when I started exploring the Seattle stuff beyond the four big bands that I grew up loving, and I started listening to Screaming Trees or Mudhoney or whatever, I was like, oh, there is more. There is an alternative to the alternative.
But Sin City and Watchmen, I mean, there were a number of sort of gateway
Yeah.
graphic novels. I think to some extent even Black Hole falls into that category. I mean, in many respects, it's sort of a traditional sort of presentation with just a different narrative. I don't, you know, it's hard for me to really point at any one publication that sort of, other than Love and Rockets. I mean,
Right.
me, Love and Rockets was another comic that sort of, I think, appealed to fans of both more traditional superhero comics and the alternative comics. And I'm not sure why that is. Again, maybe just the structure of the narrative or some of the themes early on were sort of science fiction fantasy. But again, I credit Love and Rockets with really sort of bringing me back to, a more traditional approach to alternative comics. I
Sure.
should add that in the early 80s, right about 1980, just as I entered the field, there was a division forming between um, approaches to alternative comics, and that can be, Raw Magazine, Art Spiegelman and Francois Moulet's Raw Magazine, and Robert Crumb's Weirdo Anthology, I think, were emblematic of that split.
Yeah.
Uh, I know Art Spiegelman. I mean, I talked to Art Spiegelman about this. He um, he wanted to elevate comics. His aspiration was to elevate comics to fine art and
Yes.
literature. And I mean, it's pretty obvious when you look at the Raw Magazine anthology that he's trying, to appeal to a more sophisticated audience.
Mm-hmm.
Crumb, on the other hand, didn't. Crumb wasn't hostile to that necessarily, but he didn't care. He
It
just
wasn't
wanted
his
people
thing.
to read it. That wasn't really his intention.
Yeah.
And Spiegelman in particular was uh, uh, kind of ungenerous. I mean, he famously called Weirdo a piece of shit.
Yeah.
I think Crumb's quote unquote. And I thought I think he viewed that as sort of impeding his uh, approach and his idea to elevate comics. Ultimately, so there was a split. There
Sure.
were people in the in the Raw magazine camp and about having a more sophisticated approach to the medium, and then people that fell into Crumb's orbit, where he was just wanted these comics out there and sort of embraced the idea that, comics were just this sort of disposable, pop culture lit that didn't, he rejected the preciousness that I think
Yes.
Spiegelman embraced. Over time, that those sort of distinctions started to dissipate, and it became one big happy family. But I think Crumb and Spiegelman still disagree about this, and you can see that in even more current discussions. But
Yeah, that Spiegelman documentary was great.
yeah, it was. They were all one big happy family. It was. I thought so too. Disaster is my muse. I highly recommend it.
Yeah.
Well, I liked all of those. For a long time, I sort of fell into the Spiegelman camp. But it was Love and Rockets that sort of brought me back to, this is a comic book. This is fine. I don't, this is, it doesn't have to aspire to be anything beyond that. Though I will suggest that Love and Rockets did become more than just a comic book. I mean, in many ways, Love and Rockets foreshadowed gender fluid, multicultural society that we all take for granted now.
Yeah.
But it was all of that was profound in in the mid 80s.
Sure.
Now we just all take it for granted. I thought incorporating punk rock into those stories, it was a very bold statement, and I think influenced other cartoonists and gave them license to do similar things.
And I think there's also a part of it, you were saying like, why did it appeal to people for certain reasons? It was just I think the art, the two of them, their art styles, it's so easy to look at and like there's nothing unappealing about it. It's not ultra pretty, but it feels organic. And two of the other books, from my point of view, for anybody, for myself, that I think is Fantagraphics' best output is some of the easiest stuff to read is Carl Barks, the collections of Carl Barks and Usagi Yojimbo, which I when I interviewed Stan and we talked about Carl, I mean, he comes from looking at a school of that kind of cartooning is like, you never want to stop turning the pages with either Barks or Sakai. You want to eat it up very quick because it's so much fun to read.
That's true. And even artists like Robert Crumb will credit Carl Barks with having a major influence, just that approach to storytelling. Fantagraphics was, I believe, the first to publish Stan. And his work is amazing. Here's a sort of interesting thing I find about Usagi Yojimbo. When it was first being published, I don't think it was intended for children. It appealed to me as a young adult. I wasn't even that young, but now it's essentially considered a young adult, or even below that, entry-level children's book. But that's a very sophisticated, sort of deceptively sophisticated read, and it still is. And I rarely pick those up anymore because when I do, I blow a whole day just reading them over.
It's so easy to enjoy.
Why haven't you read that before? Yes, about a dozen times. Here, I'll put it back. But there's something just infectious about that.
Sure.
About Stan's storytelling, and I think the same is true of Barks. And it's sort of timeless. You can read Carl Barks now in the context of contemporary society, and it makes perfect sense.
Yes.
I mean, it could have been written last week. There's just the fluid sort of narrative and
the capitalism, like
everything.
yeah,
I agree.
it's
Completely.
incredible.
And I'm really happy that you sort of pointed those connections out, because Fantagraphics output is fairly eclectic. I mean, everybody from Robert Crumb to Carl Barks to Stan Sakai and Dan Clowes and Peter Bagge and the Hernandez brothers, but there's really a thread that runs through it, and it's sort of hard to describe.
Mm-hmm.
But as eclectic and diverse as it is, it's a very cohesive sort of approach to publishing. And I think people sort of understand that when they walk into our store, and we'll have, the complete works of Robert Crumb and the complete works of Charles Schulz. And,
Yeah.
it seems to make sense. There's nothing jarring about it,
No.
I'm mindful of that as I curate and sort of merchandise the store to make it sort of linear and kind of seamless. But I don't think anybody is confused by this approach, and are embracing both the past, present, and hopefully the future of contemporary comics.
I think to maybe somebody walking in for the first time that's never seen any of this stuff, or experienced alternative comics, it may take an adjustment period. But something on top of what you just said that I love, all of the books that you've curated, whether they're Fantagraphics published or not, you have an eye for what designs really pop out. And you have books that are sitting out there on the shelves or on the table that really do justice to judging a book by its cover. Like what we're supposed to do when we walk into a bookstore is pick up a book because of the cover.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah,
I'd like to think it's pretty successful in terms of conveying this sort of aspirations or of what we're trying to sort of put out there. I mean, having been at it for 20 years, it's now, well, much longer than that, actually.
Sure.
It's become sort of just in the DNA, I suppose. But there are other artists that I would point to that sort of transcend that sort of mainstream or alternative sort of aesthetic or approach. One that's been very successful is Ed Piskor's Hip Hop Family Tree.
Yeah,
Ed went from that to doing a relaunch of X-Men in the same
grand design,
using the grand design, using the same approach. Somehow or another, I should say that Fantagraphics always allows as much latitude to the artists as possible, and Ed designed those the publications of Hip Hop Family Tree, and not just wrote and drew the stories, but
the whole package,
the concept of the whole package. And he was able to go from hip hop to X-Men, just sort of seamlessly. I mean, using the same exact approach, the same format. I don't know how he managed to get Marvel to go along with that, but but as I understand it, it was a pretty successful relaunch, revisiting the X-Men.
He made sense of what Chris Claremont didn't really make sense of in in 30 years of storytelling or whatever, 20 years of storytelling.
I think so too. I think I sort of got the X-Men story just sort of got a little too complex for me.
Yes.
It's really nice to see Ed sort of take those characters back to their origins and just sort of tweak with it a little bit. He had a lot of fun with it, clearly. But
and his oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
go ahead.
His the Hip Hop Family Tree Treasury editions, which was his idea. He also like he brought that to Marvel, and they're still doing that exact format. The same. Some instances it's the same paper, but the Grand Design books, at least in that size,
Right.
It was the Ed Piskor Treasury edition, not just the Treasury edition.
Right. I think, but that's an artist who is able to articulate the sort of connection between all of these comics. He and Jim Rugg had this very popular podcast that even if I didn't listen to it, I knew I knew the books that they were focusing on.
Sure.
Because people would march into, it would come in, these unlikely people would come in and ask for these books. And it was like, oh, Ed and Jim must have had that on their show.
Yeah. I mean,
they were absolutely brilliant in attracting a new audience to alternative comics because they clearly loved all these comics.
Yes.
And they were just able to sort of seamlessly move from one genre to the next, from one approach to the next, and sort of connect the dots in ways that I don't think anybody has before or since.
No, it's impossible for anybody to be able to do what they did. Take an episode one week of X-Men 282 or X-Force 1, and then the next week do 5 episodes about Dan Clowes. You know, like that's unheard of. I mean, I've told Jim before, like he's responsible for me sending me down the Clowes wormhole because Jim was, Ed and Jim both loved Clowes, but I think Jim was the bigger fan in the way that he talked about it. And, I've read it now. I've gone down the rabbit hole and read everything Clowes ever did that at least Fantagraphics has published.
Yeah, they were. I mean, I miss Ed's comics. I thought it was all brilliant. I thought, he had sort of the creative drive and ambition to be able to do things as diverse as Hip Hop Family Tree and Red Room.
Red Room, yeah.
Really transgressive.
Yeah, I mean, that's about it. I mean, those are the ends of the spectrum.
You love it or hate it. That was a bold move. He wasn't doing that to make money. But, he was referencing a lot of things. Uh-oh. That's a deceptively sophisticated series of books, of comic books. And I communicated real closely with that as he was doing that. My wife found it disturbing, by the way. Get this comic book out of here. But,
well, it's one of those things like, you can look at it and just say, oh, it's face level, it's gore. But then if you get to know Ed, whether it's personally like you did or through Kayfabe, you knew it was all tongue in cheek. It was him exercising a part of his brain. Yeah. Like, I'm going to just make the goriest comic because I loved Tim Vigil comics as a kid.
Yes, it was, it was an insane project, but, they would publish these blank covers, and I didn't know the purpose of those. I was very naive. I only found out later they were made for people to take to conventions.
Yeah, sketch covers. Yeah,
and they're supposed to. I just thought, oh yay! Yeah, what a great guy! Now we can make our own covers.
That's right.
Oh God. And so I would communicate with them and, sort of interpret some of his characters and themes and do my own covers for those.
That's awesome.
He never told me, we'd communicate back and forth and a lot about technique or what pencil, how did you do the coloring on that? At any rate, I miss Ed dearly for a number of reasons. We established almost the first time he came here,
Yeah.
Years ago, it was almost like I was immediately connected. I thought he was a really interesting person just beyond his comics. And I think
Sure.
that the podcast he did with Jim sort of reveals a lot of of his appeal. You
Hmm.
know, I it's hard for me to articulate, but
I understand.
I think that podcast really is a true insight into Ed the artist and the person. You know,
Yes.
I don't know Jim as well. I do on one of his pieces, but
Hmm.
I knew Ed. I knew Ed. I mean, we saw each other fairly frequently when he was doing hip hop, and um, I just sort of miss his presence. But I
Hmm.
guess I brought this up to suggest he's one of several artists, but maybe uniquely so, that's able to sort of tie together the various sort of approaches to comics, and he just had this infectious enthusiasm for
Oh
all of
my God, he did.
um and I'm sorry we lost him, particularly sorry in the way we lost him, but
Yeah.
um and we were communicating right up until the end. um and I think of him frequently. Rarely does it's diminishing over time, but uh I, I long after he left us, I would see something. Oh, I gotta text
Yeah.
Ed. I gotta send Ed would get a kick out of that. Still, but I mean, we had a lot in common. I didn't. That's I have a sort of. I really like the fact that he was able to appreciate so much of the medium. Uh, in
he was
in
a
his own.
champion of it.
Yep.
Yeah, he was. I and we have talked about this in the last couple of years, and you've sent me packing to Pittsburgh with a bunch of stuff for the family, and I know they're super appreciative of all the things that you've had me bring to them.
Yeah.
The thing about it is, like, he left behind all of this amazing, not just the work, but with Cartoonist Kayfabe and Jim, like a historical document of
Yes.
talking about comics. And yeah, every once in a while I'll come across a book and I'll be like, oh, I should send that to them. And then I'm like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it happens. I didn't know Ed well. We communicated a bunch. I bought some art from him, but
Yeah.
getting to know his family and hanging out with them in Pittsburgh and stuff, and just Justine let me look through sketchbooks, his old
Yeah.
sketchbooks, and it's so funny because, like, he drew so much, but every like 4 or 5 pages there would just be Wolverine. He would draw Wolverine more than it seems like, more than anything, and but you get he lived, breathed, and slept comics. Like, that was, and we're all better off that he was that person.
Right.
You
Which
know?
makes his passing all the more tragic. But
Yeah.
there are other artists, I think, that have that same love of the medium,
Hmm.
um, but don't necessarily have the platform that he was able to develop with Jim.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I mean, that was a real interesting phenomenon that
Sure.
I don't know that has been done successfully before or since. Like, essentially taking more traditional mainstream approaches and connecting it to more experimental or adventurous comics, and uh, that enthusiasm sort of transferring to fans that
Sure.
were listening to that would come in. I mean, and a number of these customers I've become really close to, and they'll, I mean, it's not like they've rejected the Image Marvel
Yeah.
EC approach, but they've managed to they've folded in these new works, and I'd like to see more people making that effort.
Well,
I don't have personally. I don't have enough contemporaneous appreciation of of mainstream comics.
Sure.
To be perfectly honest with you, I'm having an increasingly difficult time connecting with current mainstream comics. To be honest with you, there was a time not that long ago that I'd get caught up in a storyline, or it's just been. I'm not sure. I suspect it's a result of a lot of suits, a lot of corporate,
Yeah.
hegemony over the publishing, over mainstream comics publishing, and it makes me wonder. I think now it's thought of as IP, not comics.
There is part of that. I mean, yeah. Well, I wanted to just say, to your point of, people coming in and, Ed and Jim bridging the gap between mainstream and alternative. I mean, you're talking to a guy who is a prime example of, I walked into Fantagraphics because I kept thinking about all of the books they would talk about on a weekly basis. Yeah. And here we are a couple years later, 3-4 years later, and you're on my podcast because of that. That is, this is a result of Ed and Jim talking about Fantagraphics and the books.
You sort of branched out and discovered your own. I
did.
Are you a fan of Jim Woodring's work?
Well, yeah, but that's a result of being in this in the Seattle area for a couple. I didn't know who he was before I moved 11 years ago.
That's really adventurous stuff, though. That's like, I've had that. I've had that experience with so many fans that previously were completely unaware of this, and have developed their own sort of sophisticated response to this work, and it's really satisfying to me to see these consumers that really wouldn't have paid any attention to anything quite as adventurous as, say, Daniel Clowes, which, in spite of all of success and, adaptations of his, some of his comics into feature films, and he's still sort of an obscure creator, and a creative genius. It's nice to see a broader appreciation of works by artists like Daniel Clowes and Simon Hanselman, and a number of other cartoonists that really were inspired by the same early works of EC and Jack Kirby and
the greats.
Yeah, and then just somehow in managing to sort of take those initial inspirations and create something entirely new. And the fact that they found an audience, and they found an audience here, really, I find really gratifying. Anything I can do to advance this, it's become sort of my life mission,
I wanted to segue into something I was going to ask you, and I don't want to put you on the spot, so I won't limit it to choices. But, maybe you could give the audience and me 3 or 4 books that are great entry points into the world of alternative underground comics, Fantagraphics, because I think that's a perfect way to let people know is, you're the guy that's curated a lot of this stuff. You've read a lot of it, so you would know.
I've read almost every book here. I don't necessarily love every book that we carry, but I read them all. I just mentioned this artist, though. Simon Hanselman. He was a
Hmm.
Tasmanian artist who actually developed his career in Melbourne, Australia, before moving to the U.S. Extremely provocative work, anthropomorphic. It didn't appeal to me at first. I guess I didn't really give it a proper chance, but at one point, Art Spiegelman uh, dropped by, and
Hmm.
and both Art and Charles Burns suggested, yeah, this is the real deal.
Mm.
I read it with a fresh approach. The entry level with him is Mega Hex, and it's the story of these miscreants that are completely uh, demented, and just this gang of misfits that sort of bond. And over time, getting to know Simon, and over time, I discovered that this is largely autobiographical. As
Hmm.
crazy as these comics are, they're pretty much his story.
Hmm.
And the techniques that he uses are he grew up in abject poverty, and he made his own inks out of
Oh my God.
so he has a palette that's a little different. He made his own organic inks because he couldn't afford them. He couldn't afford a drawing table. He draws laying down on the floor to this day because that's how he
That's
learned.
wild. That's wild.
Uh,
Yeah.
and the comics sort of tell this story that, I mean, it's hilariously funny, and it's sort of ridiculous. And before I even got to know him, you can tell there's something else going on there. So,
Sure.
so I suggest Simon Hanselman. He has a big presence on social media, but
Hmm.
there's nothing like the books that he creates. Mega Hex and anything thereafter. A series of 5 comics that sort of tell his life story. I mean, this is sort of like, which of my children do I like the most?
Yeah.
I, I pretty much love everything by Daniel Clowes,
Hmm.
his early work to his most current.
Yeah.
I became familiar with him through an early comic called Lloyd Llewellyn,
Hmm.
uh, and that evolved into 8 Ball Comics, and um, I think probably uh, the first comic that brought him, national recognition was serialized in 8 Ball called Ghost World, which
Right.
was adapted, which he adapted his own work to a screenplay and was nominated for an Academy Award into the adaptation category for Ghost World.
Great
Uh,
movie.
Thora Birch and a very early Scarlett Johansson, as a
Hmm.
young adult, and Steve Buscemi. Daniel was involved in just about every aspect, from casting to editing of Ghost World, and I'd suggest that's one of my favorite books. But almost anything, really anything
Sure.
by Daniel Clowes. And I've gone on about Hip Hop Family Tree, but there's an omnibus of Hip Hop Family Tree with the direct by Ed Piskor with what he calls director's commentary that
Hmm.
I just adds insight to almost every panel in there. Um, so the Hip Hop Family Tree, especially the omnibus, I think it's really important to read that from beginning to end.
Sure.
Uh, what else? Um, Robert Crumb has a new book out. His
That's
first
right.
comic book, his first standalone comic book called Tales of Paranoia. That's just it's really hard to offer any kind of synopsis other than it's completely crazy.
It is. It
That's
is. Yeah, it is
Paranoia
reading.
really is an apt title for that. So
It really is.
and I love the
Yeah.
fact that a septuagenarian artist like that is still
Still creating.
producing work, and
Yeah.
compelling work, regardless of whether or not you can you agree with his assessment of contemporary life. It's a pretty ambitious project. Other uh, other than that, there's almost every day I read something that um, completely appeals to me. There's um, a real interesting book called "Raised by Ghosts" about a young woman, Brianna Lowenson, that was sort of neglected as a child and sort of
Mm-hmm.
raised by ghosts. The implication she kind of raised herself, and she found her people in the punk rock movement in the East Bay, and it's just something that's completely relatable, beautifully drawn,
Mm.
and just sort of transports you into this world that of her adolescence. And uh, I could probably go on about almost every book in the store, but I think I mentioned three or four.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
A lot of
I'll
those are
throw.
legacy artists, but there's a lot of brilliant work being done
Sure.
by emerging artists that I've always liked watching artists grow from, showing promise in their early work and then,
Mm-hmm.
fulfilling that promise later. So, I mean, I like a lot of books that don't necessarily succeed, but show promise. And it's
Yeah.
like, um, I mean, there's a number of books that artists that I've seen progress from sort of rugged beginnings to um, just absolutely brilliant work. Locally, an artist named Mark Palm, who has a series
Yeah,
of
he's
published
great.
books um, that tell a really fluid story of vampires and monsters, and I think anything by Mark Palm is good. A local self-published artist, and there's some great work by it's self-published work I really enjoy. A lot of times its comics are sort of slight, but um, very fulfilling. Um,
Yes, yeah.
just
Self-published stuff also leads to great autobio or slice of
yeah,
life or even embellished autobio comics.
right, yeah. It's I like the fact that it's unfiltered. You don't have
Yeah.
this editorial publishing process. It just goes from the pen to the press.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of and that's sort of a refreshing approach to comics. And I find myself reading a lot of these mini comics that are relatively inexpensive, and um, I think they allow the artists a lot of latitude to explore different approaches to
Yes.
contemporary comics.
And then I want it one album. Can you give me one album that's an exemplary album of maybe what would be an experience of good listening to while you're reading Fantagraphics books, no matter what it is? Is there something that maybe, you're like, oh, I love listening to, I like to pair music with comics a lot. I
Right.
listen to a lot of Trent Reznor soundtracks while I'm
Yeah.
reading.
Yeah.
But Fantagraphics has got its own vibe. So I was just wondering if there's something that you can connect those dots.
Yeah. Well, we share space with the record store. So I have this constant soundtrack,
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of selected and curated by the record store
Yeah.
staff. And I hear a lot of, I hear a lot of really interesting world music, from, it's hard for me to identify a specific album, but I've been listening to a lot of East African
Hmm.
pop music, not
Interesting.
traditional, music that you would necessarily even associate with the African continent, but
Mm-hmm.
their approach to pop music is really interesting. I Beyond that, you know, I'm still a little old school, but one of the albums I like is called Under the Bridge. It's by a band called Lake.
Okay.
And I think it's so a lot of that music was composed for, well, some of it was composed for an animated series called Adventure Time.
Oh
Have you ever
yeah, of
heard of
course.
Adventure Time?
Yeah,
So
of
it's sort of
course.
soundtrack music. It's by a Northwest band called Lake.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Under the
Ashley
bridge.
Aronson is largely the composer, and it's put out by K Records, a sort of lo-fi Olympia, Washington
Mm.
label. So anything by Lake, I like to listen to that because it was composed for comics, for
Yeah, for
cartoons,
cartoons, but no
a different
difference.
approach. And so I'll recommend Lake specifically.
All right. All
That's
right.
it.
I'll definitely check them out.
Yep. I
Um,
think I mentioned when we started this uh, broadcast just earlier this morning. Got up at the crack of dawn and hosted an interview session with Mark Arm
Mudhoney.
the frontman for Mudhoney, and
And also Green River.
yes, Green River, and even earlier Mr. Epp, which we were talking about. But he was being interviewed for a local arts uh, show called, well, Nancy Guppy's Art Zone. At any rate, that's the local PBS affiliate
Mm-hmm.
broadcast that, which made me think of Mudhoney. I mean, Mark used to work for Fantagraphics at our warehouse, and I'm very fond of "Touch Me, I'm Sick." That's one of my
Yeah, great
favorite sort of
song.
punk
Great
rock
song.
anthems, and um, it was nice to see Mark. And I know that having worked for Fantagraphics, he's sort of aware of the uh, comics, the counterculture comics uh, approach to life in general. But
Yeah.
so I would, I highly recommend almost anything by Mudhoney.
I will
That's,
second that. I will second that.
background.
They famously started what's the name of the song? Overblown. It's
Yeah,
Everybody Loves Us, Everybody Loves Our Town.
yeah, right. Very
Yeah.
much so. All right.
So yeah, so that's great. Before we get going, any events in the store you want to plug? I mean, Hot Off the Press doesn't happen until summertime,
Yeah,
but
July
yeah,
11th. And
July 11th.
I'm working on that. Typically, I start working on that right at the first of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just coming right up. I have a show by a brilliant comics adjacent artist from um, the Bay Area named Chuck Sperry.
Yes.
I have some sort of vintage prints by Chuck Sperry that's sort of promoting the incredibly strange wrestling. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it sort of relates to Jaime Hernandez. It was partly inspired by Jaime
Oh
Hernandez
wow.
wrestling comics. And,
Mm-hmm.
um, that's coming up. I expect to have, speaking of Jaime Hernandez, I expect to have him up later this year with,
Oh.
and, I'd like to get Simon Hanselman back up. We have another legacy artist, Roberta Gregory, with the collection who will be appearing at the store. Um, but one of the highlights of the year here is Hot Off the Press. And
Right.
Hot Off the Press is where I specifically try to examine the connection between music and alternative comics and visual art to some extent. Again, that's July 11th. I can't make any announcements of musical guests, but
Fair enough.
I'm negotiating now with some very high profile, highly regarded musicians
Oh.
and artists. And we've talked about, again, Jaime Hernandez, Katie Skelly, possibly Simon
Mm.
Hasselman, and uh, uh, a number of other artists that
Okay.
have. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself.
Sure, no worries.
I'm real confident that that's going to be an exceptional year for my hot off the press book fair, and that's on Saturday, July 11th. So mark your calendars for that. And if you're around later this month on this Saturday, I'm opening up this incredibly strange wrestling prints and ephemera by work by Chuck Sperry, who's again an exceptional graphic artist who's, if not a cartoonist, it's very relatable, closely related.
And so this is going to be premiering a day and a half or 2 days after that Chuck Sperry goes up. You can see it now at Fantagraphics Bookstore, and I'll put the address and all the links appropriate in the description below. You can, obviously, if you're in Seattle, it's in Georgetown, just open up Google Maps and let the computer do it.
And follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more info on all the exciting happenings at the bookstore. I think we're all
Larry,
set.
Thank you so much for this. I'm so glad we got to do this, and appreciate your time.
Thank you. We'll talk soon, obviously. All right.
Thank you so much, Larry, for your time. If you are in Seattle, visiting or a resident, you must go to the Fantagraphics Bookstore. It's small but mighty. It shares a space with Georgetown Records. There is so much to look through there. Their back room is the 50% off scratch and dent room. Like I said, right now, if you're watching this in the month of January, the Chuck Sperry Underground Wrestling silkscreen poster event is still going on. You can check out that. Hot off the press is in July, as Larry told us. I put all the links in the description below. If you are new to my podcast, please consider hitting the subscribe button either on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, wherever you're listening to or watching this. And if you are a longtime listener but you haven't left a comment, please do so. It helps the engagement. It helps new people find this podcast. You can also rate and review on Spotify or Apple. Any engagement from you, my listener and watcher, helps me grow this podcast. And, who knows what that does? Maybe Dan Clowes comes on the podcast at some point. Fingers crossed, right? Other than that, I have another channel called West Coast Avengers, which is just comics. You can find my comic sales, live sales over there, my travel videos where I go to Japan and hunt manga, all that kind of stuff. I try to keep the interviews just strictly on here. And I have a Patreon for $5 a month. You can help support the channel, get bonus videos on both channels, as well as a exclusive sale of stuff that's not on the regular channel. And it's just $5 a month. It is less than a cup of coffee, no matter what place in this country you live or in the world at this point. I was just in Japan, and a good cup of coffee is like $6, but $5 or whatever. Anyway, I'm going to stop rambling about coffee and Patreons and all that stuff. Thank you so much for listening and watching. I'll see you next week on Direct Edition.